Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham. It's very, very important that we speak to people that speak for business. You know that on the State of the Nation, we are always trying to work out who speaks for business, and we do have some concerns as to who speaks for business. But I have got utter confidence in our guest today as being a great spokesperson for business, and that is Busisiwe Mavuso, the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. Busi, welcome to the State of the Nation. I am so glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Thanks,
You've
Mike.
got
and
a
thanks for inviting
fantastic CV, qualified CA, spent a little bit of time in banking.
Yeah.
You've been former MD, CFO of Black Management Forum. You've been around the block. And then, of course, the thing that I like most about your CV is that it's a little bit grey as to whether you walked out of Parliament or you were kicked out of Parliament when you told the politicians that you don't want to make, which was in reference to Dorata, him the fall guy for the ANC-led government and the mess that they've created.
Absolutely.
They didn't like to hear that, did they?
They didn't like to hear that. And it wasn't just about Dorata, it was about the board as well. You know, because we were being asked questions, Mike, that had absolutely nothing to do with us. And everyone in the room knew that the mess at Medupi and Kusile has absolutely nothing to do with this board that was appointed in 2018. This is a mess that goes way back. You know, this is a Luthuli House mess. But because no one actually wants to actually confront those skeletons, they thought that they could actually lay it on our heads. And the chairperson of SCOPA at that time asked us to explain as the board, you know, why Medupi and Kusile are in the shambles that they are in. You know, and I actually had to, when that answer did not come out from any of my colleagues, I thought to myself, well, it would be wrong for us to actually walk out of this meeting without having addressed that. So let me actually address it, that you're asking the wrong people.
Yes, because I failed to mention that you were on the board of Eskom, so that was the context.
Yeah.
I recently interviewed on this channel Mteto Nyati.
Yes.
And I put it to him because obviously he's done a hell of a job in turning around Eskom.
Absolutely.
But the problems at Eskom were either, you can either dress them up as being very difficult, or you could explain them as being very easy problems. These were problems that were being sanctioned from above, weren't they? You've got a whole lot of coal that needs to be turned into a fire, which gets turned into energy, you know.
Absolutely.
In principle, not a difficult thing to understand.
It's in principle not a difficult thing. And I think if you remember, Mike, we were the first post-state capture board, you know. So that organization, up until the time we walked in, had been the ground zero for siphoning funds out of the state. They were the number one target, you know, where politicians were actually looting. And we were brought in after Cyril Ramaphosa came in as the president when Jacob Zuma was recalled to say that, and his first mandate was to say, let me clean up the SOEs, let me bring in new executive teams, let me bring in new boards, you know, and I sat on that new board, you know, under the leadership of the late Jabu Mabuza at that time, and we obviously walked into a whole lot of mess, you know, in Eskom, you know, so there was a lot of cleaning up that we needed to do, there was a lot of issues around governance that needed to put in place, there was a lot of issues around processes and systems that were deliberately overlooked, you know, that we actually needed to put in. So it was a very difficult job, you know, so we actually sat under a lot of pressure, you know, the fact that our minister was a micromanager as well did not help. A minister who actually meddled, you know, did not help. And you could see that...
And that's the late Pravin Gordhan.
That is the late Pravin Gordhan, absolutely. You know, it actually did not help. And so it was a very difficult job. I think Mteto Nyati and the new board came in after the groundwork was actually done. I think you would remember we commissioned a report, you know, as BLSA, the company that I'm the CEO of, where we looked at, and it was called a clandestine report, you know, where we wanted to look at what exactly is happening at Eskom that is not overt and that we're actually not aware of. Because, Mike, it didn't make sense. We were putting a whole lot of time, energy, effort, and pressure to push Eskom towards a particular direction, and it was just not going into that direction. I'm not an engineer or any physics person, but I know that if I exert force in this direction to this cup, if it goes in a different direction, it means there is interference in the system. So we knew that there was interference in the system. And whenever we'd actually report to the public that the stage 6 load shedding that we're actually having is because of sabotage, Pravin would come in and say, you can't continue telling people these excuses. You have to come up with proof. And Andre, in his own way, thought that if I'm being put under pressure to come up with proof, it's not going to be done in Eskom. As soon as I try and commission something like that, obviously, it's going to be compromised because the people that are actually responsible for the malfeasance at Eskom are not outside of Eskom, are inside of Eskom. So he knew that he actually had to go outside of Eskom and ask, a constituency that could actually help with commissioning this report.
Yeah.
And it happened to be BLSA, and we obviously, BLSA and other businesses whom I don't know who else he spoke to, and we decided to actually help look into exactly what was going on.
Now, I had a wonderful interview with him, Teto, and of course he's part 2 of this particular discussion, and he doesn't really want to go too deeply into part 1. But the question then is, were those people that were responsible for having Eskom not working, have they left the organization, or have they just decided to stop doing what they were doing?
I think if you look at what was happening, the corruption, not just in Eskom but in the country, Mike, is, and it continues to be, so systemic, so endemic, so embedded, into the systems of the organization. It's sort of like been institutionalized, so I think there's way too many people, and I don't think all of them are gone. I am still convinced that state capture still continues, to happen in these SOEs, not just Eskom, Transnet as well, and a whole lot of other bigger ones. It's obviously at a smaller scale because we have come a long way in as far as that is concerned. And I think the exposure, and the spotlight that has actually been shown on Eskom, in terms of the diesel mafia, in terms of the coal mafia, in terms of, and if you remember, Cyril Ramaphosa, I think it has at his State of the Nation address just that year, spoke about the fact that because of this report that Eskom had commissioned, so many people were actually arrested, So they knew about the report. So it was very interesting that when it came out, they were like, why clandestine report? Why did you commission it? Why? And I remember the chairperson of Eskom at the time was called to Scopa after Jabu Mabuza, Professor Malchapuru Mahoba, actually said, Pravin knew about the report. I knew about the report as the chairperson of Eskom. So politicians now playing dumb, as if this was done behind their backs. They were not told about any of this is actually not true. So are the people still there? I would like to think, of course, they are still there. But I think because there are so many, because this thing goes too high, it goes too deep, it goes too wide, there was no way that 6 months report could actually identify each and every single person. But I've got no doubt, that we are not out of the woods yet when it comes to the extent of corruption and malfeasance, not just at Eskom, not just in other SOEs, but broadly in the country and particularly in government.
Yeah, you can't help coming to a conclusion that a nasty agreement has been reached whereby those people keep their ill-gotten gains as long as they don't do it anymore, and the justice system will not pursue them anymore, because it looks, it's been that way forever with politicians, where we won't arrest you, keep your money, just don't steal anymore.
And that is unfortunate, because the message that is sending to the public, Mike, is that crime pays.
Yeah.
You can be accused of the most horrendous crime, like the crime of state capture. A whole lot of those government officials, a whole lot of those ministers who actively participated are still in government today. So we are not sending the right message. We are not taking a no-nonsense approach to crime. When you continue to have government officials and some of the ministers who see nothing wrong, with stealing, in the case of COVID, for instance, stealing money that was meant for PPE, money that was meant for food parcels and whatever the case is, and they still continue to be in government, you are actually saying you can be accused of crime and you can still be in parliament. You are actually saying that the criteria to rising up in the politics, terrain, has got absolutely nothing to do with ethics. So that is actually unfortunate. And when you see the crime and corruption being widespread as it is in the country today, we're looking at ourselves and we're saying, what went wrong? Well, that's precisely what went wrong. I think there is a serious moral degeneration that we've actually condoned and accepted and normalized in this country. And if it's not going to, this fish called South Africa is rotten from the top. And if you're not going to deal with it at the top and take a very no-nonsense approach and be very clear, about taking very decisive action, about those people at the top, then it's not actually going to be dealt with here at the bottom.
So would you say that the establishment of the government of national unity has actually, in a way, been bad for South Africa because it's allowed those people that were involved in this to continue or to cover? We've seen it most recently with former Minister Zizi Kodwa, where he was able to get away with what, one would imagine if this was a television show, within half an hour he would be in jail because it's straightforward corruption, one can see it.
Yeah.
But yet we've got a justice system that fails to get the paperwork right, and off he walks. And now the government of national unity seems to be quite useful in just providing cover for the ANC and the walking away with those crimes. Do you think it's been a bad thing to have that government of national unity?
I honestly don't think so. I am a proponent of the government of national unity. Mike, I am convinced that we needed to be here as a country. Something needed to give, and it needed to give quickly. We had to be rescued from policy decisions being made in the dark corners of Luthuli House and being rubber-stamped in Parliament because they had the majority in Parliament. We needed a government who is constituted by different political parties who can somehow make sure that they keep each other honest, and I hope that that is what the government of national unity is going to do. I trust that that is what the government of national unity is going to do. Different political parties who represent different social interests and different social groupings. We need our fate as a country being decided by not one homogeneous group. And I think that has not gone. It hasn't worked in a whole lot of countries, if not all of them, in the African continent. And I was particularly disappointed, like I'm sure many South Africans were, that as the country that attained its democracy last, you would have learned what not to do, because we have seen what has gone wrong, in other African countries. One of my favorite speakers, and I think strategist and whatever you actually want to call him, is Professor Patrice Lumumba. He is a Kenyan Pan-Africanist. And when he speaks about Africa, he says Africa will only rise when it allows, the right men and women to lead it. He says the problem with Africa is that there is no political hygiene. He says if the politics are not going to be right, then the countries and the economies are not going to be right. He says when you as Africa continue to elect clowns into government and you think that they would go into government and be kings, what they do is that they turn the entire government into a circus. He says no wonder why Africa is sitting where it's sitting. He says but the problem is also with the followers. Why do you continue to put people in place who are not fit for purpose, people who are not supposed to be there in the first place? And I really think that that is important. So I think what we did on the 29th of May 2024, as a country was actually important to say enough and no more. We need more people sitting around the table of different political parties so that we don't continue to be hamstrung and be choked, by the failure, of this one political party.
But now let's talk about the social side of things. We understand that, and anybody that should understand the social attraction of the ANC, that will, in many cases with many voters, will die with those voters. They'll take it to the grave, right? We've seen that in many countries, not just in Africa, but around the world. A liberation movement will have an emotional attachment way beyond politics. But we've had the the massive rise of a black middle class that now is significantly bigger than the most significant portion. Despite what some people may say, the black middle class is now the big class. But yet they're silent. This is the thing. You know, I lived in the old South Africa, where that system could only survive because the white middle class wasn't. Not everybody's going to become an activist, but there were a lot of people that could have said something, but they were silent.
They were silent.
They kept quiet and voted for the National Party. They said, oh, we don't like the route that South Africa's going, but they wouldn't vote out the ruling party. When do you think the black middle class is going to assert itself and make some difficult decisions?
Mike, I don't think that the black middle class is actually silent. I think the black middle class is outnumbered. Because when you look at our social structure, for instance, 10% opulent, about 30% middle class or less, and more than 50% of our citizens who are actually living in poverty. So when you look at that 30% or 25% or whatever that number is, that is where the black middle class is actually sitting. But the bigger number is actually at the bottom of the pyramid. So I think the rise of the MK party is not because of the middle class, it's because of and the reason why they jumped all the other political parties and became number 3, you know, in the elections. It shows you how many people, you know, I have no doubt that the people that are voting for the MK party are people that are disgruntled. They are disgruntled because for some reason they are outside of the inner circle of the ANC. You know, a lot of them that we're seeing now, members of parliament and stuff, were people who used to be in the inner circle. Now they're outside because of the state capture project. You know, somehow the system, you know, chew them up and spit them out, and now they are grieved and somehow they're seeking revenge. The reason why, for instance, parties like the EFF, you know, gained such traction was because their messaging appealed, you know, to those people in the bottom class, and they were actually telling them that through affiliating to us, you can actually rise up the ladder and you can find yourself in the middle class. You and I earlier on were speaking about the land issue, for instance, you know, promising them things that they know very well that they cannot deliver. So I think what we have a problem with in this country, which is a real problem that this government of national unity has to address, is that you have way too many people who are not participating in the mainstream economy. Yeah. And that is going to become a problem. Those people, therefore, don't have any particular loyalty. If you come and promise them that, you know, through giving me your vote, I can somehow put interventions in place that are going to lift you, you know, out of this social class that you are in to the next social class, then that is where they're actually going to go. Yeah. You know, because I think that is what we're seeing in the country. I have no doubt, for instance, maybe no doubt is too strong, I am convinced that the MK party, the way it's going to implode. It's going to implode, but there's going to be someone else who's going to come in their place, right? Because I guess it's not about the MK party, but about what the grievances of these majorities are. And the grievance is the domestic inequality that is giving rise to social instability. The grievance is the 43% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition. The grievance is that you have way too many people who are, or you have more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except Gauteng and the Western Cape. The grievance is that 2 out of 3 young people are unemployed. The grievance is the fact that South Africa is the most unequal society in the world. The grievance is that you have poverty levels of more than 50%. The grievance is that you've got a public healthcare system that is collapsing and failing. The grievance is that you've got a basic education system that is actually not churning out, you know, what industry needs. Even if these poor kids, you know, go to these public schooling systems and they study hard and they get a matric, they sit with a matric certificate, even if it's all A's, of maths literacy, of geography, of life orientation, of Zulu, English, and Afrikaans. What what do you do with that? You go to university, if you are lucky to, you get a degree that I'm not looking for as industry, because the focus now is in STEM subjects. The focus is in technology. And yet the schooling system did not set you up for success. It's like you've lost the race before you've even begun running. That is what the grievance is. And unless and until we actually address that grievance, then you are going to continue seeing the rise, of these populist movements, because their messaging appeals to the majority of the citizens of this country. So I think that is the number one problem that this GNU government is going to have to address.
Can I clap for that? And I'm sure everybody's clapping as they watch this. But you've summed it up so well, which leads us smartly into the important question, which is the failure in South Africa to create an economy that creates opportunities. Now, Madam CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, Business and Leadership and South Africa, this is an indictment. You've perhaps signed the wrong document.
Sure.
Now let's talk about the failures of business in South Africa.
Yes.
Because, boy, do we have failures in South Africa. One just has to look at a country where your population growth is outstripping your economic growth, and that just means your country is going backwards.
Absolutely.
And we've been doing that for more than a decade now. And yet business just cozies up to government at every turn.
What does business cozying up to government at every turn means?
It means that business doesn't, and a present company accepted, doesn't necessarily stand up to government with some of these nonsensical laws that we have and the environment that is killing our business. It wouldn't take us more than an hour to identify the blockages in the South African economy that stops people that are watching this program from starting their own businesses. But yet it's like we are talking a different language when one deals with the government. Why has Business Leadership South Africa, among other, been so unsuccessful at creating an environment to improve business in South Africa?
Yeah. And I like the fact that you're saying, why have we been so unsuccessful? Because I think I would argue that it's not from a lack of trying on our part. I think we are probably not as influential as we think as the business community. We don't have the political clout that we thought we had, as the business community. And I think that is because if we had, the NHI would not have been signed, right? So it shows you that there are other voices, that the politicians probably maybe listen to other than business. And these are issues that we have raised. I think the reason, Mike, why you have a business-government partnership today is precisely because, and I understand, and I absolutely agree with you, the statement that we've made around the fact that business itself is also not clean. Business cannot continue, Mike, to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. Business in this country, when it comes to transformation, has to do more, and we have just not done enough. I mean, when you look at how we engage, for instance, with BBBE and its element, enterprise and supply development, we are not doing it from an understanding that these are interventions that are going to normalize our society. I think we are doing it from it's a tick box exercise. It's something that we have to do, for compliance and whatever the case is.
So let's just stop there for a second. If you're admitting that this is an exercise in futility, right? Because ultimately we're trying a social engineering experiment. We've been doing it for 30 years, and quite clearly it doesn't work. Surely there are better problems to solve. For example, and I've been very vocal, I do not think that the problem is this term transformation is a very loaded term, right? Because it can mean different things to different people, right? In South Africa, we've taken that to mean replacing a white person in a position with a black person. Now, that's not creating any economic prosperity whatsoever. It's maybe moving it across, but it's not creating a new business. You're not creating a second job. You're creating the same job. You're just filling the same position with a different person, right? So transformation, as I see it, is transforming a moribund, oligarchical type of economy into something that can grow, right? But yet your go-to position is to say, no, we are not doing the tick box exercise right. And I will challenge that vociferously. I do not think that's our problem.
So, Mike, it's not a function of we are not doing the tick. Let me actually get into this. Enterprise and supply development. Look at what it is intended to do. It is intended for business to take 3% of their net profit after tax and spend it on small emerging businesses, develop them to where I need them to be as Nedbank, identify opportunities within Nedbank to say, once I've developed you to produce these cups for me, then I can actually start buying from you. So once I get you to that level, then you can start getting my business. So when I'm saying it's a tick box exercise, it's not being done that way. Because there is a Busi Incorporated who says to Nedbank, I can actually take your ESD money, give you your points, and I'm going to go and find these black entrepreneurs or these black people, and I'll train them in. The training is not even targeted. It's not even a function of I've done an exercise as Nedbank to say that I need the procurement opportunities within Nedbank are these folders, are these pens, are these that I can give to small businesses. I've not done that exercise.
Sorry,
I'm just giving you money.
Just to challenge that example.
Yes.
Sorry, and I'm not trying to cut you off or mansplain. Yeah.
No, it's
right?
okay, it's fine.
But this example you've just used.
Yeah.
Have you created one more cup? Have you created one more folder? All you've done is you've changed the provider of that cup and that folder. So in other words, the net economic impact, right, means that company large has 3% less business and company small has 3% more business, right? I'm just using that as an example.
Mike, let me challenge that. Let me challenge you back and say that you have just a few minutes ago rightfully raised the point that we have a situation in South Africa where our population growth is outpacing our economic growth. Now, if the economy is growing at 0.6% like it did last year, and it's projected to grow at, 1% this year, and whatever percent. Now, if that has been the trend for the past 10 years, if you are hearing the Minister of Finance saying that the tax revenue has gone down, and the biggest contributor to the tax revenue going down is because there are less people employed, meaning there are less people paying pay-as-you-earn, but the biggest contributor is corporate tax. Companies are actually making less revenue because if you've got 43% unemployment, it means there are so many people who can go into your businesses to buy your goods and services. If there are less people buying your goods and services, you're making less, revenue. If you're making less revenue, you're making less profits. You're making less profits, you're paying less taxes. So if that is the environment that I'm operating within, where does this growth come from? So if your challenge is that I'm supposed to be producing, because if I'm currently producing, I would argue, Mike, that even if I'm producing, I'm buying 100 of these. Instead of buying 100 of these from another big company or importing them from China, can't you buy, if you continue to import 40 from China, but take 60 and give it to a local business, because at least then you are generating economic activity and therefore creating employment. Because as a small business, all of a sudden getting this tender to supply 60 of these things on a monthly basis, I can't do it on my own. I have to get another 3, 4, 5, 10 young people to come and actually produce this. And there's 10, might not be a lot, but 10 people who no longer have to depend on 350 unemployment grants. So I really think that is the rationale, especially when it comes to
but the rationale doesn't hold water. And the rationale, it's a thing that really gets me, is that I agree with what you're saying. What you're saying technically sounds fine. But the company that you're taking that business away from, not that I'm talking for them, will now have to employ 5 people less. So in other words, your net impact is almost nil. It's
Mike,
got to be.
When you do an exercise, you will see that big business in this country is buying from other big businesses.
Yes.
Now, if another big business were to actually lose, an order of 40 of these, they've got people that they can, chances are that they're even producing this There's not even, there's probably two people who are, I don't know, maybe drawing this. This is obviously an automated thingy. So I think the impact to them is less, you know, rather than it would be. If you were buying these from another small black business, it wouldn't make sense to actually reduce their order. But that is not what big business is doing, because they are buying from other big businesses.
So are we not looking at the problem incorrectly? Because, I mean, this is the most frustrating thing in my life, right? And that is that we keep on looking here when the problem is here. What we need is
to grow the economy.
Entire new industries, the ability for somebody to produce something that doesn't exist right now, right? So I'll give you a simple example. Could we ever, what stops us from having a Silicon Valley in South Africa? And I mean, I know this may sound ridiculous to people, but we know that there's a capital problem, there's a skills problem, there's a this, there's a that, there's this. So, you know, rather understand what's stopping that process, rather than saying, oh, here's this pie, let's cut it up differently, like that's going to make a difference. And I've got the facts to prove it, because we've seen no growth in 15 years while we've tried these bad policies.
And we wouldn't have seen growth because the economy has not been growing at the right level.
Because you're not talking growth, you're talking redistribution.
But what would take the establishment of new industries?
That's a very simple thing to answer.
Okay.
And that is quite simply making it easy to do business, which we have got an aversion to in South Africa. Right? We have got an aversion to two things. We have got an aversion to making business easy. And I'll give you my reasons for that, because because the cozy relationship between big business and government means that big business gets to write the legislation, right? And what are you going to do if you're a big business? You've been involved in big business. You're going to create as much legislation as possible, because that keeps out competition. So the government, who's got no business experience, falls for it every time. Right? They now allow rubbish like FICA and RICA, and you've got to have files and 1,000 lawyers and 20 million accountants. Big companies love it because they've got the budget to employ those people. A small business can't comply. So now what we have is we've got a mountain of
rules and red tape and compliance
And then
issues.
There was my mystery person. If you ever watched the Sipho Nkosi, I don't know if you exist, but Cyril Ramaphosa once appointed you as the red tape cutter. I don't know if you exist. I don't know if you ever cut red tape. I don't know if you have a scissors. But please get hold of me. I'd love to know about your experience as the red tape cutter, because you were singularly unsuccessful at doing that job. So I'm saying this as somebody that's run a business my whole life. I've just seen red tape upon red tape. I thought that the national government couldn't be topped, but my God, this nationalist government has outdone them in the compliance on everything. And when you mention tick boxes and for you it's a tick box. Somebody's got to tick that box, and I can't hire them. Right?
But then if you're talking about business, how is big business creating legislation? Because we don't have
that's the dirty little secret, and we don't want to get into this, because
no, but
all I'm saying is
I'd like to know, because I don't sit and write pieces of legislation as BLSA.
No, you don't. But what will happen is that when the government has another little lechotla with business, who's in the room?
But
right?
which lechotla is that, Mike?
Well, right now we've had this Operation Vulindlela, haven't we?
But Operation Vulindlela is not a lechotla.
But it's had those people in the same room. Then suddenly, if we need legislation around medication, well, Aspen happened to be there. So suddenly you're going to get all sorts of guidance.
Operation Vulindlela has actually done the opposite, because they're actually saying precisely the issue that you're raising, let's open up industries. That is the work that they've done. The reason why you have a liberalized energy sector today is because of Operation Vulindlela. The reason why you are going to have a transport and logistics sector that is liberalized is precisely because of Operation Vulindlela. Yeah. So they're actually doing the opposite, which is what we've been advocating for.
What you're saying to me is that big business in South Africa would love more competition. And I'm going to tell you that quite simply, you can try and convince me all you like. I'm not going to be convinced on that, because I've never seen a big company that wanted more competition. So I'm saying, Mike, that if they
the country would be best served.
Yes, we know that. You and I know that.
Absolutely.
But what I'm saying is turkeys don't vote for Christmas, right? So big companies, but
we don't have to vote for it, but government must go ahead and do it
Well, government don't know business. So that's why I'm saying.
So then they shouldn't be government. You have the wrong people in power.
Let's talk to 20 million voters, right? But the point is, and to be fair, let's be fair to our voters. What do they understand about business? Because in many cases, they've only seen 15 years of economic stagnation. No wonder they think Venezuela is a good idea. No wonder they think Cuba is a good idea, right? Because they've seen no growth. But yet business in South Africa seems to be quite comfortable with the fact that we are showing people no growth, no aspirations, and on top of it, we almost criminalize wealth, wealthy people. We keep on talking about poor people as if that's what we should aspire to. So I'm saying that we've got this thing back to front. And I'll put it in a different way. We had a recent election in America, and 3 of the most influential people there, not necessarily the most likable people, but 3 of the most influential people, are ex-South Africans, right? Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Patrick Soon-Shine, right? Influential billionaires. Could they have started their businesses in South Africa? And the answer is categorically no. And if they cannot do those businesses in South Africa, why are we failing the future entrepreneurs that could be billionaires, and in creating an environment in this country for you to run $1 billion business?
But Mike, there is no source of disagreement between you and I when it comes to the issue of red tape. We have raised it all the time as big business, that the compliance, the amount of time, energy, and effort that we spend on just complying with legislation is just not acceptable. So there are
but nothing ever happens about it.
But who's supposed to do something about it? That is the point that I'm making. And we know it's government, but then you protecting government, you're saying, but they don't know what to do. Then I'm saying, then you have the wrong government clearly, right? Because the fact that they don't know, there is no excuse for incompetence and the ignorance that government has in as far as this is concerned. If government has got the most powerful instrument at their hands that no other social partner in any country has. And that is an instrument of putting legislation in place and putting policy. So through policy, they can actually craft and create and reorchestrate and reshape this country to how they would like it to be. But if they are failing from a policy perspective, if they have the right policy, then they are not monitoring and evaluating. So how do you actually then shift that blame to say that because you've got an incompetent government, you as business should actually, but how do we do it? That is not what we're there to do. Government has to do what it's supposed to do. And I don't think that just because, they are failing to do something, then you actually find another social partner to say these are the ones who are actually supposed to ensure that it happens. Because we don't sit in those rooms, we don't sign these things, we don't even put up these draft legislations. Instead, we spend a lot of time, energy, effort bringing in experts to read this legislation and try and respond to it and actually push back on it. So I think you're really locating the red tape blame to the wrong constituency and to the wrong social partner, because that should squarely be sitting with government, not business.
And you don't get into the room with the various ministers?
When they we get into the room and we raise it all the time. If you saw my newsletter just this past Monday, it was an op-ed actually on business, on News 24, I was talking about the competition policy. I was saying that the competition policy, is actually not what it actually should be. The way they are doing it, it can actually stave off investment. I was talking about, these are the issues that I actually raise all the time. So I don't get to sit, around the table and actually put this piece of legislation together, not from a business perspective.
So do you think business in South Africa has the appetite to take on government?
Look,
and by taking on government...
But we have.
No, I'm talking about taking them on properly. And here I'm talking about things like, let's recall things almost from the mists of time now, 2 or 3 years ago when Clover left Lichtenburg because the local government couldn't fix up roads, they couldn't provide water, etc., right? I've mentioned on this platform many times that I'm a very beleaguered citizen of Johannesburg, and I watch people playing games, and I watch people stealing money, and I see you as an accountant, they approved a 2.5 billion rand capital loan which they're using for current expenses, right? I mean, come on, can you imagine if somebody did that in your organization, right? Yeah. And yet, I think it's time for a rates boycott, right? Now, if a rates boycott, for example, let's just say we got this together, would business support this?
You'd have to talk to the businesses that are paying rates and ask them if they'll be willing to withhold.
Would business leadership South Africa support this? understanding it's
I
going to
don't
end
know.
your relationship with the
I don't
government,
know.
wouldn't it?
I don't know. It's not about the relationship with government. Now, we differ with government openly and publicly so when we need to. But we also realize that you're currently sitting with a government that is not a capable state. You're sitting with a government that has been hollowed out. You're sitting with a government where, during the state capture project, there was this notion of clever blacks, people who knew what they were doing, were chucked out of government, and you saw that being replaced by cadre deployment. So the way we have constructively chosen to lean into the problems that we have in this country is to actually say, how do we put in the skills, the expertise, the money that is required to fix these things? The reason why you have 230 whatever days without load shedding today is because we gave about 350 engineers to Eskom to help with the problematic stations, and we actually ensured that we mobilized the OEMs to come back and actually help with the fixing of that. We struggled with that when I was at the Eskom board. You know, some of these OEMs said, you have actually messed this thing up for so many years. We've been talking to you about selling you parts. You are not interested. Now that this thing is collapsing, you want us to come back. We have actually been working with government to actually fix the problems, and we continue to. Because a lot of work that we do as the business community, the potholes in Joburg are being fixed by business, you know, by the insurance industry, you know, Discovery and Sanlam and whatever the case is. So that is how business has actually chosen to lean in. Because then, to your point, if these people don't know what they are doing, you withhold rates and taxes. That's probably one way of doing it, but I certainly think that the way we're doing it as well, I don't think there's any silver bullet, Mike, to the problems that we have. I really think that as the only social partner with disproportionate resources as business, we have an obligation to look at how do we utilize our disproportionality and the resources that we have to help this government become a capable state. And we have chosen the 3 areas of energy, transport, logistics, and crime and corruption at a national level to try and help government with those. And we are seeing progress. We have helped them with the visas. We are leaning into water right now. We are going to be leaning into local municipalities. We are leaning into a whole lot of areas because we think that that is how we actually move forward. Instead of shouting from the sidelines, we will continue to shout from the sidelines if we need to, but we also think that we need to roll up our sleeves and work alongside them.
So, Busi, now you've made some wonderful contributions in those areas, but the question arises, like there's never a right answer, is do we not then run the risk of the government taking credit for this? And, you know, for example, they're not going out saying it was the private sector that got Eskom right.
And they're not, absolutely. And I think the reason why we got involved in it is because the fortunes of business are tied to those of government in this country. If government fails, business fails. I mean, I'm sure you would remember the CEOs of Pick n Pay and ShopRite, those retailers in particular, talking about spending 60 million rands every month on diesel. Now, we needed to put a stop to that. And that is why we actually came to the party, you know, to say that we have to stop load shedding. You know, if we don't get given credit or whatever the case is, but we actually have to go in, because when Cyril established NECOM and said that this is going to be a unit that is going to look at stopping load shedding, and we did the quantification and it needed 120 million, I can tell you now that 120 million didn't come from government. 25 million of it came from BLSA. When he established the NLCC, National Logistics Crisis Committee, to look at the Transnet problem and said we needed 150 million, that 150 million has not come from government. 25 million of it has come from BLSA, and the rest has come from other businesses as well. You know, the independent experts that sit in the Department of Transport today to try and help with the implementation of the roadmap come from business. Those people are on my payroll as BLSA. That is how we're actually leaning into the problem. Now, we might not be given credit for it, you know, but we know that the movement forward that we have in this country that can give this chance, that can give this country a better chance of growing our economy at the right levels and dealing with the issue of unemployment, you know, we are effectively contributing to that. And I think that is important.
Well, I've got to tell you that where you could see business making a difference is that Pace Car Rental is a little car rental business that sponsors us. And they can only do it because they don't rely on government, because we say a lot of things that I can bet you that none of your members would sponsor a show like this, right, where we actually actively discuss these topics, right? They will get away from it 1,000 miles. They wouldn't touch it. And those companies that are fixing the potholes, great for them, but they're getting the publicity. They're doing that as a very calculated business thing. So, you know, South Africa have got a few issues, and you at least have, you know, prepared to talk straight and take them on, and we can only wish you the best in your journey. Thank you so much for this. Support Pace Car Rental. They deserve the support. I think we've got to support companies that are hiring people, that are disrupting industries. That is the way this economy grows. We need to create an environment where entrepreneurs stand up and start new businesses in new industries. But Busisiwe Mavuso, thank you so much for coming in from Business Leadership South Africa. To everybody that's joined us today, subscribe to the State of the Nation, and we'll see you again soon. Busi, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks.